Well, what makes you think that?
Will you leave me alone?
No, I want some answers and I want them now.
Well, what do I need school for? I'm never going to have a job. I mean, as soon as I graduate high school, I'm going to find a rich guy to marry, and I'll never have to work another day in my life, just like you.
Well, what do you plan on doing with your life? Sit around all day watching soap operas, go out only to spend your husband's money?
What do you do all day?
I've got my ladies' auxiliary meeting, my Alcoholics Anonymous, my volunteer work at the church. While you were flunking out of school and spending all of our money, I was personally raising $5,000 for the needy children of Uganda. I've got more than enough to keep me busy. But you, all you want to do is go out on weekends and spend all of our money and hang around at parties all the time. What do you do at those parties anyway? Smoke grass, sniff cocaine, and have sex?
It's none of your business what I do, and it's none of your business what grades I get or where I spend my money. I like you better when you're drunk 24 hours a day. At least then you kept your misery to yourself. And I think
To the distant past, when he was like 15, he joined a mail-in movie club, 11 days for pennies. And now cut to 2025, the movie club caught on to Pete's life, and now they want to punish him, so they trapped him in a room with a bunch of movie tapes. Pete didn't want to pay for the movies he got in the 90s. He'll have to watch random horror tapes and tell us about gore and probably some rape. Now keep in mind Pete didn't pick. They use random numbers and a long list. He's got to get through every movie, one each day for the time we can't foresee. Helpful snowman roll call. Anxiety. Grouchiness. Entropy. Snow. If you're wondering why he did this song and other FAQ facts, just shut up and listen to this show, or fuck it, take a nice nap. It's Helpful Snowman Podoween 2025.
All right, next is a movie called Disgusteen, like Disgust Teen. It's kind of an interesting one, but not because the movie's interesting, but because of what it documents sort of on accident is interesting. Disgusteen is a movie made by Ben Weasel, who's the lead of the band Screeching Weasel, which was part of a Chicago punk scene that kind of developed into what became pop punk or emo in the early 2000s. So it was like bands like Screeching Weasel, Slapstick, The Broadways, The Lawrence Arms, Apocalypse Hoboken, a bunch of these bands, which eventually became a movement headed by bands like Alkaline Trio and Fall Out Boy kind of thing. The movie does have a very punk feel to it. Like, it's shot on VHS. It kind of looks like shit, but the sound isn't bad. They must, probably because they're in a band, they had access to real sound mixing equipment and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's a pretty big relief when you're watching. When a movie fires up and it's clearly shot on video, your first thought is like, fuck, am I going to be able to hear or see anything? But you can hear things. And there's even some pretty good music in it. So like, and only, sound wise and video wise, it's made by a band, but there's only probably one or two songs worth of self-indulgent concert footage crammed in here, sort of inexplicably and not making sense with the plot, which is fine. You know what I mean? I'm like, hey man, a 3-minute music video in the middle of your shitty movie, that's fine. So basically, I don't know. There's little in this dungeon worse than a VHS movie that you can't really hear and then you struggle to hear only to realize maybe you were better off not actually understanding the dialogue and sort of filling it in yourself. I mean, not even because the dialogue that I come up with myself is necessarily better. It's just more like when you're trying to create and fill in the gaps yourself, it makes the movie sort of a puzzle. It's like an activity to occupy the mind while you're watching. So that's at least something. That's how far down this rabbit hole we are right now. Disgusteen is a vampire story. So there's a group of punks who I thought were all vampires, but it turns out just one of them is a vampire, I think. But then he turns the others into vampires at some point. Like, I don't know, that part's a little convoluted for me. I didn't understand that we weren't seeing all vampires. We just had one, but most of them know the other guy's a vampire, but they're just not vampires themselves. Our entry character into this world, the Harry Potter of this, or the Bella Twilight, who leads us through everything, is a teenage girl who doesn't get along with her parents, who are also played by teenagers, looking dressed up like Crispin Glover in Back to the Future, and a mom who's like, very housewifey looking from the 50s also. And these are probably actually the best parts of the movie. It's like fucking great because, it's there are scenes of parents telling their teenage daughter, who's 3 days younger than them, and they're having these arguments that have a weird energy to them. You know what I mean? It's almost like if you made a movie where small children played all the adult roles and adults played all the kid roles, which would be kind of hilarious. I mean, it's not a movie-length gag, but, it could be funny. It's kind of a little bit of that going on. And it's like we're seeing what a, I don't know, 19-year-old thinks like, what would a bitchy restrictive mom be like? You know what I mean? How would she be unreasonable? What would she be complaining about, and stuff like that? And then, of course, the teen is making really good points like, you keep telling me not to do drugs, but you take, Xanax all the time, or, whatever. So anyway, this entry character goes off to a party, gets bitten, turns into a vampire, and we're off. I mean, we're off to nowhere, really, but that's where we're starting, at least. And the rest of the movie's mostly kind of a hangout. Like, there's not much plot to be found. The girl's a vampire, and, it's fine. There is an attempt to have a final showdown with another vampire, who I guess is the original vampire, in which they brilliantly solve the problem of an unbeatable, super strong vampire by hitting him with a car, which is pretty funny. I mean, I don't think it's meant to be funny, but, they have a Volkswagen thing, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. I only know what that is because a guy I went to high school with had one. First, he had a Volkswagen Beetle, which I rode in one time, and it was a death trap because, something was wrong. There was a hole in the gas tank, so basically the entire floor in the back was soaked in gas, and the whole thing smelled reeked of gasoline and stuff, and I was just like, oh my God. I went to a high school for 1 year that was really far across town because they were renovating the high school I went to. So you had to find a ride home. You know what I mean? And it was that was the only way to get home. You could not get home otherwise. And I took some very sketchy rides as a result of this. I remember being in that car with the gas smell, and he had this weird punk rock version of the Sesame Street theme song playing, and there was a lot going on. And another time I rode home with a guy I never met before, but a kid who lived close to me was getting a ride from him, and I managed to wrangle a ride as well, since he was going there anyway. And he drove insanely fast and right on people's bumpers the entire time. And he was just like, yeah, I like to drive fast. He was very matter of fact about it was almost like he was like, I don't know how no one else has figured it out yet. If you drive super fast and crazily, you get places faster, and it's a little bit more of an activity for me. And I was like, yeah, okay. And I never rode with that guy again because I was fucking terrified. Even as a high schooler who's like, I'm invincible, I was like, this guy is definitely gonna get killed on the road. Anyway, I don't know, vampire stories, I guess, when I'm talking about this movie, I feel like vampire stories are sort of defined most times by what the vampires can and can't do, what their powers and weaknesses are. Vampires are kind of like X-Men that way, where it's what are your powers and what's your weakness? So Disgusteen's vamps are immortal, And they can be in the sun, but they don't sparkle or anything. They can be staked and garlicked just fine. They can't really be killed, I guess, other than by another super strong vampire somehow. The drawbacks seem to be you can't eat people food and you can't drink beer, and also your genitals shrivel up or something, so you can't have sex. So I guess, no food and no sex and no beer as a trade for immortality. They also drink blood, but it seems like they can drink each other's blood, which seems to be like a big vampire no-no that someone invented at some point. And maybe even able to drink their own blood. So, I mean, that doesn't seem like as big a problem as it is in other movies. I don't know. It's like, it would be like if you were a supernatural creature that could only survive off drinking pee, but you can just drink your own pee. So it's like, well, it's gross, but it's not like a problem. You know what I mean? I feel like the vampires having to feed on people is something that has to be in modern vampire stories, because it's like, what's the downside here? And I don't know, that doesn't, there's sort of an idea in this movie. It's like, if you've seen the movie Near Dark, Disgusteen is kind of like Near Dark with crusty punks instead of like crusty, I don't know, biker types. And I like movies that make being a vampire look shitty, because like most of the movies make it look kind of awesome, right? But then they're constantly trying to remind the viewer like, no, it's not awesome. It's a horrible curse. I'm cursed. You know what I mean? It sucks to be immortal and sparkle in the sun and to have to drink blood, but you can totally just drink deer blood or whatever. So it's not really that different from eating a chicken nugget or whatever. I mean, everyone's always dressed like the boy on those chocolate and shortbread cookies I like with the fancy French name that I can never remember. And I'm just like, get me those cookies with the, I'm not going to say the terminology I use. I mean, like, all the vampire shit in most of the movies, it looks pretty rad. And they just sort of have to try and convince me it's not. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, imagine you could live forever and never see the sunrise again. You know, and I'm like, I mean, I've seen the sunrise like 5 times in my entire life. You know what I mean? It's not that awesome. Plus, you can't just fucking look at the sun anyway, idiot. Anyway, like, Near Dark doesn't make it look very appealing, and neither does Disgusteen, and that's kind of where they're similar. I mean, it's like, imagine if you could live forever, but as your 1990s self, who was probably a little overly invested in the local punk scene and really wanted to live in a loft with a bunch of couches that someone barfed all over and no one would ever consider buying a toilet brush. You know what I mean? That wouldn't be... You'd have 9 roommates and none of them have ever cleaned a toilet. So, like, here's the thing. Like, this movie can only really exist in this form. You know, if a studio with a budget made this kind of movie, I think they would fuck it up. You know what I mean? It would look clean, and I can't really see a studio getting it right. You know what I mean? It wouldn't feel, the vibes would be off, as the kids say. So, I mean, if it's a punk vampire movie you want, if it's like a 90s punk vampire story, I think this is your option. I don't know if I'm going to say it's like, you should watch this. If that sounds appealing, watch this. I think what I'm saying is like, if that sounds appealing, this is the closest thing to it. If you think you want a punk vampire movie, you know, this is it. So like, I guess watch it and then feel free to reevaluate your desires. I'll also say this, kind of, it's a little Halloween-y, right? I first heard of Ben Weasel because I used to listen to a podcast back in the day, and the host of that show was like sort of a problem youth and ended up being sent to a boarding school for problem childs. And it turned out this boarding school is insane. You can look it up. It's called Elan. It was in Poland Maine, something like that. It was in Maine. And they'd send out, like, the way it worked is your parents would be like, we need to send him to a boarding school. And this school is like, here's a pamphlet. They do classes, they do outings like rafting and stuff. And, you know, we kind of straighten out kids with behavior problems. And then they send, like, 2 guys just show up at your house and take you and drive you cross country. And then you get to the school and basically, they force kids to just clean all day. Like you'd be on your hands and knees cleaning the floor all day. There's no classes, and there's definitely no like going out rafting or anything. And then they would do therapy where it's like they make the kids scream at each other, and like they would make kids even sometimes get in a circle and fight as a way of like moderating behavior. I mean, it's fucking nuts. And I'd heard about Ben Weasel because he also attended this school. And when the podcast host that I'm talking about was having trouble at the school, they actually sent him to meet up with Ben Weasel because Ben Weasel was like, no, I mean, it turned my life around for the better or something to kind of convince this kid to stay. If you want to hear this story, I found the story fascinating. I'll link to it in this episode's description. And what you'll want to listen to is the second audio file. Like the first one is a lot of setup and just stuff that's happening currently with the host, and it's not going to make a lot of sense. But the second part is where you get into the story, and it's pretty fucking amazing. Just know it's part of this show used to do marathon shows where what they would do is if they got, let's say, $100 of donations, they would go another hour. And if they got another $100, they'd go another hour, and they just keep going as long as the donations came in. And so like, if they got $200 in the first hour, they would go the next 2 hours, but they wouldn't announce it until, that hour was coming up. So that way people wouldn't necessarily know if they were going to keep going or not. So the first part is a lot of setup from like a comedy show they had done or something. And then the second part is where they get into the boarding school story. So if you're interested in that, I found it very interesting, and it's pretty fascinating and pretty fucked up. And then it kind of trails off towards the end. But then there's a part 3, and it does pick up because it's kind of the part where he leaves the school and how that all worked out. And that's also pretty interesting. So I'm going to rate Disgusteen by the age at which I would have thought it was super cool and punk, and that those things would make it unassailably awesome. And I would put that at like age 12. Like it would have seemed grown up to me when I was 12 and pretty cool that someone made their own movie like this at a time when that, at that time, this wasn't an easy thing to do. And like, I would be incredibly embarrassed by my love of this movie later on in my early adulthood. But at this point in my life, I'd probably be sliding back into like, I'm no longer embarrassed by things I used to enjoy because I just wish I was capable of enjoying anything anymore. Like, what happened to that beautiful, special, wide-eyed little idiot who was so in love with the world?
It's Hopeful Snowman Podoween 2025.